Hello from Blades Music. This video is going to expand on the which EQ should I use concept, going into some of the details of how different EQs work and why you would choose one over the other. In my first video of this series was an overview of what might lead you to that choice, and this video is going to be about the first one, which is the PreSonus ProEQ2, coming up next. So the ProEQ2 came out in, I think it was Studio One 4.6. I might be making that up. But it's definitely there in 5 and above. And the 2 in that means that there were a couple of extra features in there. So I'm going to cover those real quick. One of those was the linear phase low cut. Now, linear phase, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. I'm not that familiar with it myself, except that I know that it reduces the phase issues that you sometimes get from EQs. Now, sometimes that can be a good thing, and sometimes that's what makes EQs sound the way that they sound, but a linear phase is going to make sure that the latency between different frequencies is aligned so that when you reduce one or cut one on this linear phase low cut, you're going to be doing it in phase, and you're not going to have any of those phase issues that you might have. This is a little heavier on the CPU, and it's also got some latency involved in it, but you will get a more transparent cut. And that's going to be this first view over here on the left-hand side, and when you turn that on, you will see that you get a couple of choices here on where that cut is going to happen, 20, 50, or 80, and if it's going to be soft or not soft. That's it. This is a good sounding EQ for that cut if linear phase is what you're after. If it's not, or if you don't really know, maybe skip this part and just go on to the regular pieces of the EQ. Another piece that they've added in here is the level range up here at the top. The level range allows you to go to 6, 12, or 24 dB on the scale over here. So you can see we've got a 24 dB scale that allows us to do extreme things, right? So if we were to take this one right here, we could boost that up 24 dB. That's an incredible amount of boost on that, right? And it allows you to get to things like 12 and 18 and stuff like that that you wouldn't be able to even see in 6 dB mode. However, those are pretty extreme settings, and unless you really are looking for an extreme setting on purpose, those kinds of levels probably aren't going to be super normal. So if we put ourselves back down, I'm going to go all the way down to 6 dB. You can see that when I do a boost of like 3 or so, right, we're at 3.02, that it looks like a pretty significant difference. And 3 dB is a pretty significant difference. If you are boosting or cutting 24 dB of signal, you're either doing something for sound design, something very surgical, or something that maybe you should go back and re-record at the source if it requires that much fixing. All right, so that's another piece. So I'm gonna put this back down here at 24. We have the option to turn the curves on and off. This was easy to, I guess, miss before. Same thing with the band controls. We can turn those off down here. This has to do with what the display looks like while audio is playing, whether you're going to get wide bars, narrow bars with more granularity, if you're just going to get the FFT curve, which is just the actual graphical curve of that, or a waterfall display. I am not going into the waterfall display in this video. However, just to kind of give you an example of what we're talking about here, I'm going to solo out my kick. And I'm going to try not to unsolo my my vocal, or you won't be able to hear me. Right, so we're going to try to do this. All right, so I've got my vocal in safe solo mode now. All right, so I've got my kick in here, and I'm going to go to the ProEQ on the kick, and we're just going to listen to this kick drum, and we're going to put the EQ on it, and you're going to see what's happening here. In fact, you know what? Let's just get this out of here. Let's just go ahead and put one of these things right on my vocal right now so you can see what's happening here. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to find my ProEQ, and I'm going to drag it onto the track. All right, so now I've got my vocal here, and you can see that 12th octave option that we have. Nice narrow bars. Third octave is going to look more like that. It's a little less fancy. I'm not sure exactly why you would choose to use one or the other. I usually just leave it there on that. If you do the curve, you're only going to see the curves. You're not going to actually see the bars. That's a view that's actually common to my console 1. And then the waterfall effect that I said I wasn't going to talk about. This is something that is definitely probably worth its own video. So I'm going to go back here to the 12th octave on this. You can see over here on the left, we've got an input gain, or an input meter rather. On the right, we've got an output meter. So we can make sure that we're kind of level matching this thing. And there is an option for that to be automatically level matched if you want to do that, to make sure that you're not just adding volume, because things sound better louder. And then we've got the usual suspects. On the far left down here, we've got a low cut. Over on the right, we have a high cut. These guys can be at a couple of different ranges here. And I'm going to go back over to a track that I'm not actually talking on. So the different ranges for this. So if I do my low cut here, you can see if I've got 6 dB, here's where my cut point is right here at the red dot. And you can see I've got about 6 dB of cut that happens there. And then after where the actual frequency is, you see there's not a whole lot that goes beyond that. If we go to the other extreme of that, 48 dB, you'll see that there's a way steeper cut happening here. Here at the actual chosen frequency, you can see I'm almost at the, I'm way down on that. I'm minus 12 here. But that cut actually goes up quite a bit higher than it would on the lower dB per octave, right? So this is for if you have something that you need to cut out of the bottom of your mix. Same thing here on the other end. We've got the high cut, and we can do that same kind of a thing. We go to like a 24 dB and move that back, and you can see where the purple dot is right there is where my actual chosen frequency is. So you've got a little bit below that, and then everything after it getting cut off at, dependent upon what the slope is that you've chosen, that's going to determine how much of that cut is actually going to happen. And then in the in-between, you've got the low frequency, low mid, mid, and high frequency. You can see we've got this guy is turned up just a little bit right here. And so this is a little bit about the controls. You can either use the nodes here, and you can pull the controls directly around. You can go in either direction. You can move all over the place, or you can use the knobs down here. You can also use your mouse wheel right there on the node, and you can see that it will change the Q. Good reason why you might want to use one over the other is, let's say you've got this in place and you want to actually cut that particular frequency rather than trying to drag it straight down. You just use the knob and that'll pull it out like that. Another same kind of a thing, if I know I want a certain amount of gain and I want to make sure that I'm boosting by a certain amount to find what I'm looking for, then you can use the frequency to shift that around this way rather than trying to hold it exactly right in place, because you'll end up doing this kind of a thing. So you won't be doing an exact comparison when you're using the node. It is quite visual though, to be able to do that. So that's the basic controls, not a whole lot to them. Now the question is, how are you going to use them? And the first thing that I want to talk about just a little bit before we go into the audio examples is how do you figure out how to cut a problem frequency? And this is something that I've seen, and I've seen a number of videos that have brought this up, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up as well. The boost it till you find what it is that you're looking for that sounds annoying so that you can cut that thing that's so annoying. The problem with that method is that everything when boosted way up sounds annoying. So the key is to know what it is you're looking for first, identify what that sound is, then boost, listen for that sound being accentuated, and then cut that sound. And I'll go into that a little bit here with the snare drum when we get there. All right, so here's some sound examples. So let's get this thing out of here. I'm going to go over to the kick drum. And you can see in this example, I've actually got an EQ already dialed in. And what's special about this? So let's hear the kick drum first without anything going on it. So I'm going to bypass that. I'm going to hit play. All right, now this kick drum is coming off of my ProMimic Pro. And you can see there's not a terrible lot going on there. It's not super interesting. Now I'm going to hit the EQ. Okay, so what have I done here? Well, first of all, I've actually boosted the bottom end on this kick drum quite a bit. And the reason I did that is I listened for a particular resonance in that kick drum, and I boosted it up, and I gave it a little bit of width, so I got a little bit above and below it. And it automatically makes that drum a little bit thicker, a little bit fatter, rather than being as thin. It gives it a little bit more. Now, when I did that, it also kind of accentuated this point right here in this low mid, so I kind of cut that out of there. And then up here at the top, I added a little bit of that beater sound, but I did it on a really wide Q so that you're hearing a lot of those high frequencies and not one particular one, which can sound really pointy and annoying. If you do it kind of wider, in a case especially like this, where there's not a whole lot of high frequency content in there anyway, I do it on a wide bit and I just turn it up a little. You just get a little bit of that extra air, right? So I'm going to turn that off and back on. So here's the kick again. On. Now, another thing that's worth pointing out, that display, this 12th octave display, this is what it looks like after the EQ has been applied. Now, of course, that kick drum on its own probably doesn't sound like a whole lot of anything. In fact, you're probably wondering, why all the random kick drum notes? This is just a regular, drum part played in. Okay, so that's the kick. That's what that kick drum sounds like on its own. I'm going to move on to the snare. So this one's actually a really good example of when to use a cut. So you can see here I have a little cut right here. Actually a pretty big cut. It's a minus 12 dB cut. And then I've got a little bit of a boost right up here. And this is to eliminate a ringing sound in this snare drum. So I want you to listen for the ring in this snare. So you hear that note. Now what I'm going for is to try and find that note with this EQ right here. And so right now I have that set as, this guy here is at 855 Hertz. So I'm going to turn that off and then I'll turn it on and you'll hear what we cut out of there. All right, now, when we listened to that, we knew what it was. So I'm going to say this is minus 13 or so. So there's that annoying ringy sound. And I'm going to pull that out of there. Again, that's that concept of hear what the ringing note is, identify the note, find it on the frequency spectrum, pull it up until you really hear that note ringing out, and then pull it out so that you can really get rid of it. Your ears will tell you a lot of, kind of maybe the general range this is in, and as you get better and better, of course, your ears are going to really hone in on exactly what that is. And then you can probably find it pretty fast, with or without a sweep. Now in this case, I also cut some of this bottom out with a low cut. I only did this just to do it in this case, right? Now this is a drum module, so there's no sound of the room coming through there. There's no other extraneous kind of noises and whatnot happening. So there's not a whole lot of low-end rumble that I have to worry about. I just kind of cut the very bottom off of it just for the sake of cutting it out of there. So let's move on to shaker. So I did this shaker part, and this is the shaker in use. So it's a little one of these little LP kind of things, right? Two little pieces, a lot of really small pieces in there, and they're plastic. It's a great sounding little shaker, and it can definitely fill a lot up, especially if you're using electronic percussion and you want to add a little bit of realism to it, adding some other elements like some real shakers, so a real tambourine, any other kind of real percussion that you can add to that is going to help that realism. Now in this case, I actually used this mic right here to record this, and while I did it, the furnace or the air conditioner was running in the other side of this wall. Now, generally, you can't really hear it unless you're listening for it, like if you've got headphones on or whatever. But it is absolutely definitely there. So what I want to do is I'm going to play this shaker track here by itself, and I want you to listen for that low-end rumble that's happening, and then I'm going to use this low cut to take it out. Now during that, I actually turned off my vocal because, well, I have the same problem right now and it was really kind of clouding that. But what you can hear is what's actually happening down here. And you can kind of see it, right? If you crank up the volume. And I'm going to show you that example right now. We're going to take this low frequency guy right here and I'm going to boost it up while I'm playing this back, and you will see how much content is really down in there. You'll probably hear it as well. So you see that right there? There's my furnace. I wanted to get rid of that. Now if I bring this down, you really can't see a whole lot of it, but it really is still there. Pull that over there, and that background noise is gone. Now on this individual track, you can't really hear it very much, but if you have 2 or 3 or 5 shakers and a vocal mic and another mic picking up some other kind of a thing, all of that adds together and it makes for a noise that doesn't help you mix. It's an unpleasant sound that's getting added to your environment that it gets difficult to listen. You can't identify exactly what's wrong, but a lot of it is that noise. So you will see a lot of people who just immediately say, I'm going to put a low cut. And you just got to figure out where the low cut is, right? And so as I showed in that other, my frequency is actually chosen right here where this red dot is. When I play this shaker back, you can see that if I take too much out of it, I'm already affecting it way up here, and you can hear it in the shaker itself. There's the example that's extreme. Now maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, like maybe you intentionally want the shaker to sound like that. Very subtle, small thing. But that's basically what that low cut can be used for in a really extreme circumstance, especially in something that's got basically no useful low end content. Also to the point of you can't EQ in what isn't there. All you're going to do if you boost a whole lot of low end in an instrument that doesn't have any low end is introduce a bunch of noise if it's picked up on a mic or on a cable or something like that, or at best you're going to do nothing at all except fool yourself by looking at it to think, I hear low frequency in that shaker. There's just not that much there. So it's another thing about EQ, regardless of whatever one you're using. This particular EQ just happens to make it really easy to look at it and see what's going on, in addition to hearing it, to hear what's going on. Being able to put those two experiences together, A, is going to help you generate better skills on your ears, but also it's going to allow your eyes to tell you the picture of, are you fooling yourself about what you can hear and what you can't. But also know that you can't just rely on the visuals. There are things about these visuals, there are parts you can hear that you can't quite see in there as well. Really important to use both pieces, primarily your ears, but not a bad idea to incorporate some visuals in there as well. All right, so moving on to, I think I had one more example in here, and that was the overheads, right? So in the case of drums, and I'm a drummer, so I'm focusing on drums right now for this. The overhead mics are what's usually going to be right over the top of the drums. And that's what's going to pick up your cymbals and your hi-hats and your toms. Now, you probably also have some individual tom mics. And then your kick and snare are invariably going to be in those mics as well. What you want those overheads to sound like can be determined by the EQ. How much of the kick drum is going to get in there? Well, if you cut the low end off of the overheads, probably not as much. Same thing with the room mics. Room mics are typically not right above the kit. They're usually further away from the kit, and you're picking up more of the sound of the room itself, a little bit more of the sound of the drums expanding into the space, right? So those room mics also, if you want your room to sound bright, well, you can brighten up your room mics, cut the low end on them, and you're going to automatically have a brighter sounding room. Same thing if you want it to sound very cave-like or like more like a stone room or something like that. You can cut the highs on those room mics and you're going to wind up with something that's got a lot more warmth and boominess to it. Could be good, could be bad. So here on my overheads, what you can see is that I've got a tiny little bit of a boost on the top end because I wanted to make them a little bit brighter, primarily because I like my cymbals to be just a little brighter than they naturally are. So again, here is the example. Here is just the overhead channel by itself. Now that might be way too subtle, especially for YouTube. I can hear it here. Overall, you might want to go just a little bit further with that. And then the other thing that I did is I also did the bus. Right? You can't see that up here. I got to go down here for that. So let's get rid of this guy. And then over here on the actual drum bus, all right, so here's the ProEQ, and you can see I kind of did the typical smiley face thing. A little bit of a boost on the bottom end, a little bit of boost on the top end. It just makes the overall sound a little bit more pleasant. So let's turn that one on and off. Here's nothing, and then I'll turn it on. All right, so probably again a little bit subtle, not a huge amount here. We have about a little under 2 dB of gain in each the top and the low. Okay, so now we're going to do all of the tracks together. This is just the ProEQ2, no other effects, raw tracks, ProEQ2. There's no reverbs, there's no compression, there's no anything else that's happening on here, just the EQ. I'll start off with the EQ turned off, and then I'm going to bring it in on all of the tracks together. You'll hear those differences. I hope you get the idea. Whether it was an improvement or not, that's up to your judgment. Hopefully you can actually hear all of those differences. I think you'll be able to hear them. They're definitely obvious here. And in a mix, you're probably going to have a whole lot else going on. You're going to include some reverbs. You're going to include some compression. You're going to have a lot of extra stuff going on. But just the EQ itself can really mold a sound. And this is just the drums alone. Of course, you would mix these with your other instruments as well. This exact EQ mix probably wouldn't work with the rest of all of the instruments in there. Just the drums on their own sound pretty good. Once you add a bass guitar or some other things, you might have to, boost and cut some additional areas on this drum kit. I hope this first example has been a useful one for you, just kind of going over this particular one, the ProEQ2 from PreSonus on Studio One. If you found this video useful, please like it, share it with somebody else. Subscribe to the channel and ring that little notification bell and make sure that you're informed as to when I'm going to put out another one of these things. I will be doing other EQs and other effects as well, both built into Studio One and also third-party things to do some comparisons between them. So again, like, share, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.